I hate waiting for the notifications. I'm probably already live.
And it went live on my end.
Yeah. Susan for SLC Aquatics here tonight with Jeremy from Sergeant Tank, coming to y'all live tonight, talking about part 2 of the Planet Aquarium. We hope y'all are having a good evening and hope you've had a good day. And wow, the people are popping in. That's awesome. They're getting their notifications. We want to welcome Jeremy into the house. Jeremy, go ahead and say hello.
Yes. Hello, Jeremy with Sergeant Tank. Want to thank you very much, Susan, for reaching out. Want me to join you this evening for a live stream. So definitely it's a blessing, and I'm honored to be on here with you.
Well, thanks for at the last minute. Sometimes I do things impromptu, and just I appreciate you accepting and working your schedule out for me, and it's an honor for me. We got everybody in here jumping like
they're
crazy.
Rolling in.
Yeah, rolling in, saying hi, y'all. And Anakin says, "Is this another all-girls stream?" He's being funny. Oh, that's too funny.
That's funny.
Yeah, I sent a link, sent a notification in the messenger this morning. Said it's time for another all-girls live stream, but I sent it to the wrong group, and Bob says, "LOL." I'm like, "Yeah, Bob."
That's too funny.
I said, "Well, wrong group." So I ended up labeling all of my groups so that I knew who I was sending what to.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I'll say a few hellos. Celia said hi. Dank Tanks. So if I miss anybody, I'm just kind of looking at the chat. And do keep in mind there's going to be a bit of a delay. I know oftentimes too. So if anybody asks any questions or whatever, my response time isn't as if I'm ignoring anybody in the chat, but it's probably on my end because it's not the greatest internet. So.
Well, we know there's about 15 to 30-second delays on most streams, and it does depend on the servers. So since it's on my server and you've joined me, so maybe there's a connection there that we won't have any increase of delay.
Sure. That would be nice.
They said Chaz was on Bob's stream, so Chaz popped his head in. I hadn't seen him in forever.
Yeah, I haven't seen Charles in... He popped in on one of the live streams over on our end probably about 2 months ago, and I know, of course, he's busy with school and trying to get things from a business standpoint up and running over there. So
I'm going to switch my screens here so I can actually watch the live instead of what we see. I got to cover things up or I'll get distracted. Okay, we wanted to bring in part 2 on the Planet Aquarium or the Planet Tanks. Last Tuesday evening, I discussed the fact that the pros and cons of a Planet Aquarium. You know, it's first of all, it's a more natural environment, makes the fish feel safe, and it actually creates more of a ecosystem where the exchange of gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide, are pretty much taking care of themselves depending on how much plant growth you have in the aquarium and how much bioload you have with the fish. And some of the pros, of course, was the natural environment, the fish feeling safer. And then some of the cons was people brought up the subject about trimming and pruning the plants was a negative for them. And then, of course, the decaying plant that causes, what is it, nitrogen? Does it increase nitrogen or ammonia in the aquarium?
Usually any breakdown of any waste, whether if that's through waste production from fish or any organic matter such as that can definitely increase your overall ammonia and nitrate levels for sure. It
does both?
Yeah, it certainly could.
Okay, and I want to make a couple corrections. We had Jason from Fish Tropics that was kind of quizzing me on it, and I wasn't prepared. And I made a couple false statements. I said that you can have more CO2 in the tank than you can oxygen, because he asked me the question about can you have too much oxygen in the tank? Well, yes, I know you can have too much oxygen because that can cause a disease as well. But the truth is you can't have more CO2 than you can oxygen, or you're going to lose fish because they need the oxygen. So, but it takes longer for the CO2 to build up.
Sure.
And I thought of it as a diabetic. A lot of times people with high blood sugars, it takes a longer period to get your body built up to high blood sugar, but it's quicker to have a sugar drop, and it's more dangerous to have low sugar than it is to have high sugar. So this true statement is you cannot have more CO2. You can only, it's better to have more oxygen, but it's better to have a balance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I agree.
And another thing that I wanted to discuss with Jeremy tonight was the fact of no filtration with the planted tank. And we were looking at, or I was looking at Diana Wallstad's article on the dirted planted tank with livestock in it without filtration. And a lot of people are confused at the no filtration. It doesn't mean there's no movement of water. It just means you don't have a filtration system that is actually taking the gases and building up a beneficial bacteria area outside of the aquarium. Everything's done inside the aquarium.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Yeah, you perked my interest because I've been doing no filtration for many years. So I just don't talk about it too often on the YouTube channel. So I'm glad you brought it up because you know all the flack that you would get from individuals. And I think it really comes down to overall experience. I think experience is key because what works for me may not work for somebody else. And I've talked about that oftentimes due to the fact that, and I'm kind of taking a little bunny trail here, but think of far as total dissolved solids, as I've talked about before on the channel, is just because my TDS, let's say, is 180 in this tank and then 180 in this tank, I can almost say for certain if we brought that to a chemist in a biology lab, the water chemistry makeup in this tank is going to differ just because the numbers may match. There's always going to be some differences there. And I did a full test in the summer, and I uploaded a very short video. We did an outdoor little pond, which was actually an old guinea pig cage that we actually used to breed hamsters, believe it or not intentionally. But anyways, so I took that and I just lined it, did a quick little how-to video on that not a very big, I would say maybe 50 gallons. And what I wanted to do was essentially, once I developed the appropriate nitrogen cycle I was looking for in the tank, is I had a nice, like a hydro sponge in there. And we were breeding some guppies, and I was also breeding some crayfish in there. And about halfway through the summer, once I felt comfortable, I went ahead and actually removed, and I had absolutely zero water movement whatsoever. I wanted to purely do it as a test to see if I would get any production. And then really just letting nature take its course. And it was taking a risk too, because of course, you know, this is sometimes the bad ends of doing social media is when you share things like that, then, you know, I'm a big advocate, never doing anything that's, you know, may cause some intentional harm upon whatever livestock you might be keeping. So in a sense, yeah, I guess somebody could turn around and say, well, if there is absolutely no oxygen exchange, you know, or movement at all, variation in there, could that potentially put them at risk? Yes. However, I went with my gut, and my gut was right. I produced several guppy fry as well as some crayfish, and the trick to that was, one of the parts that I left out is I had soil in there. So in a sense, it was a dirted tank. I used just some regular planter soil, pretty much all organic. There was no additive, of course, in there. And what I did, the way I layered it, is I put a pebble river stone on the bottom, and then I layered it carefully with soil, and then I put another layer, another thick layer of that river pebble stone over top. And this was purely as an experiment because I'm not a huge fan of doing dirted tanks. I don't feel that you necessarily have to have a dirted tank to go completely filterless. However, do not do as what I just mentioned in any one of your tanks. Make sure you at least have some sort of airflow and aeration in the tank. This was an outdoor pond, so of course elements, water, and everything was kind of acting as my filter in that sense, where I was letting nature more or less take its course.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that outside too, there's usually air movement that we can't see or feel.
That's it. Exactly. That's a great point to make. That's why I would have never tested something like that in an indoor environment, because I really feel it's apples and oranges. In a lot of larvae, so what was actually happening too is a lot of that disruption in surface, and that's a great point to actually make, is a lot of that disruption in surface, as I was checking on it, on a daily basis, is you would see between the fry and the crayfish, they're constantly moving about going after those mosquito larvae. So in a sense, it was actually working to my benefit, because I was constantly reproducing, and they were maintaining because they were living off from that mosquito larvae. So I didn't worry about mosquitoes. I had a separate stagnant tank, which I've done a video on, talking about how to harvest, which is really easy to do, the mosquito larvae. But what I found is, when I noticed from a distance and when I'll go out there and do spot checks, is I'll notice some disruption of the tension on the water surface, due to the fact that the crayfish were constantly moving, the fry were constantly moving, and so kind of helped in a sense to keep some water movement going. They were probably running away half of the time, I'm sure, probably from the crayfish is really what was going on. So it kind of worked. I mean, in a sense, I mean, it could have been a little bit more productive, but, I didn't necessarily lose anything. I mean, I was getting production as far as fry for both the guppies, and I was actually breeding panda guppies out there is what it was.
That's it.
So, yeah, I mean, it worked. I'm not going to say I'm going to do it again next year, but I wanted to just test it, because I wanted to see, could I go completely filterless, because of course, as soon as I released that, a couple of individuals like, how is it possible that your nitrate levels aren't through the roof, and how you don't have any swings? And I said, it really comes down to how I layered it in the soil was really acting as the helping the overall nitrification cycle. So I think the key thing there was the soil. If it wasn't for the soil and I retested that entire thing again, I don't think the outcome would be the same.
Well, Jeremy, how would you actually start the process? You don't introduce everything together, do you? You don't put the soil down, the plants, and then the fish in. Do you allow some?
I had some plants in there, but most of them got devoured, of course, by the crayfish. So I didn't have too much. I had some pothos, so that would just kind of just more or less just be on the surface, because I have gotten pothos to also go emerged. So I've at least had success with having them emerge and I guess you would say immersed above water surface. But
I have to.
I pretty much just I wasn't too worried. I mean, because it was an outdoor thing, so I didn't go to the extent of how you would probably appropriately do a dirted tank, especially like in an indoor and actual glass aquarium. So I didn't care as far as if the water was murky or not. I didn't introduce a livestock right away. I waited until things kind of settled down. I waited probably a week or so, something like that, and then I started slowly introducing some of the livestock out there. But no, I just pretty much just took a garden hose and I didn't even bother dechlorinating. Just let it run with a already cycled sponge that I had from one of my indoor tanks. I just threw it out there and let it run for like 7 days, something like that. And then, so pretty much just river pebble stone, just pretty much all natural organic potting soil. And then I just put another probably 2-inch, 1.5-inch layer of river pebble rock or stone on top of that. And I want to say that was it.
That's interesting. When I first got started with my aquariums again, I had all plastic plants. So when I started getting interested in putting plants in my aquarium, I started researching you know, safe house plants that could be either submerged or emerged in the aquarium. Of course, everybody knows the peace lily, that if you know, stick it in the hang on the back filter, etc., you know, will grow. But if you try to, is it submerge?
Above the water surface?
Is submerge above?
Yeah, you can say immersed grown or submerged.
Under the water?
Yeah.
I want to get the terms right. Immersed is under the water, submerged is above the water?
Well, immersed would be above, and then submerged would be like a submarine submerged in the water.
Thanks for helping me remember that.
Sure,
Under
no
the
problem.
water, submerged, you know, the peace lily will melt back really bad and really make a mess and knock all of your water chemicals off. But the pothos, I call it the ivy. I've even tried the spider plant for a short length of time, submerged, but it melted back. But I too also put the pothos in the substrate after it had floated for a while and got some good root structure. I put it in the substrate and watched it grow from the bottom of the tank, which was 17 inches. Yeah, I think 17 inches above the water, and get new shoots off of it. And then I started getting some aquarium plants and snails.
Of course.
Oh, so I know on the article that I was reading, she discussed about using power heads or air stones, you know, to move the water. But if you have a small aquarium or vivarium, whatever, you know, a power head's going to be too much water movement to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like you got to set it and forget it. And I think any planted guru is going to probably tell you that. Once you get it set and established, that's not the difficult part. It's like if you want to start rearranging things, it's like you really need to plan it out well in your mind. Not that you can, if you can be very careful, but I know for me, especially any really rooted-based plants that are really going to take hold, and you start uprooting some of that, I mean, you're really going to cause a ruckus in that tank, and it could take some time. But of course, there's ways around it if you're just patient and do your due diligence. However, I'm not a huge planted tank guy. I know, like I said, I mean, I've talked about quite a few other times before in live streams of videos, but I'm definitely an advocate with consistency is key, especially in more automated continuous drip. And depending on your water source, so there's a lot of variables here, but with that being said, I have successfully maintained almost filterless aquariums for many years. I just don't oftentimes talk about it a great deal because you're always going to find one or two individuals that says it's impossible, but yet I have hundreds of fry and they're productive. So it is possible. I guess at the end we'll agree to disagree. As long as the number one key is you're going to know an ecosystem. If you're having overall production and fry, that means that you're obviously doing something right. You have to be, because no fish is going to breed in the conditions to where it's not, appropriate. But,
did you do any water changes?
Yeah, those are the tanks where I would be doing basically, for instance, I always go, my one go-to, probably most productive tank, well, two of them. I got a 55 and then a 40 breeder that I have various kind of community breeding in there. I mean, I can breed mystery snails in my 55 in the thousands. I mean, I can't get those guys to stop breeding. It's like, what am I thinking of? Completely lost my train of thought. It'll come back to me. But anyway, I was trying to compare it to something. But so I do a lot of incestuous breeding in that 55, and I've had that thing. I do have a sponge in it, but I would feel comfortable to go ahead and remove that sponge, because in all honesty, if that sponge filter is really doing much of anything, because it's a catch-22. Now, if my continuous drip ever failed, that could hurt me if I didn't catch it in time. but we're not away from our house like that. So typically, I mean, I'm in my fish rooms enough as it is. So I'm going to notice it, hopefully in a reasonable amount of time so I can react to it. Because I've had it happen before, is where things do malfunction. But it's kind of as a backup for me. I mean, just kind of as a safety net. So I do have a hydro sponge in there. But other than that, I really think is just a lot of the beneficial bacteria is going to be housed on the substrate, because I definitely recommend for mystery snails and cystris, I would have some form of substrate just for a grazing surface and so forth, and really house good beneficial bacteria. I don't do any gravel vacs at all in that. I'm all about Malma detritus, let it go crazy. Like I said, it could be a catch-22 if you're not doing consistent water changes. So I'm replacing half gallon. I think the drip emitter on that is like a half. I would have to look. It's like a half or a gallon per hour. So I mean, simple math. I'm changing a large volume of water consistently every day. I think where the issue where folks come in, and I've had it happen myself in the past, is due to the fact if you're inconsistent. So if I did, like, say, a 20% water change, you come back 2 days later, you do a 30%, you wait 2 weeks, you do a 10%. You want to be consistent. And I think really consistency really goes hand in hand for the longevity of the livestock, the fish that you're keeping, as well as, especially, I'm a breeder to heart. If I did not breed, 90% of my setups, besides what you see behind me here, mostly, actually this one and this one, is really the only display tanks. Technically, this one behind me, I could really consider it a breeding setup too, because I do have a couple of, actually, a few different fish I have in here, technically breeding groups, but I just don't put the time into them. I mean, they're gonna, obviously, you can see by these fish, they're pretty big. That fry ain't gonna last too long. But so I got my eye on another breeding project maybe in the future. My rainbow cichlids behind me would like to take. I know that they can spawn because I've seen them do it, but of course they ate their fry. Yeah, so I really enjoy breeding, and again, I think really consistency comes down to it. So if you're gonna do a non-automated system, then I would recommend you get yourself on a routine and try to stick to it. So if you're doing day or weekly water changes, let's say you're doing them Sunday and Wednesday, whatever it is, whatever your prerogative is that works in your schedule, make sure that you're maintaining those every week. So don't do like a 10% on Sunday, do a 10%, on Wednesday, and then you come back the following week now doing a 15% or a 50%. And then I've had other folks ask before, let's say their ammonia levels are now through the roof, or even their nitrites, or even their nitrate levels. Probably more so the ammonia levels are now spiking. They notice a spike. I think oftentimes the first reaction, and we've all been there, been in the hobby long enough, is you want to do like an immediate large volume water change. I think that's absolutely the worst thing you can honestly do. Take it slow. Do slow water changes to slowly reduce that, because you have to realize they're already in a state of shock, especially if they have ammonia shock or even nitrate shock. I mean, it can really cause some really adverse effects I've found by doing large, drastic water changes. So what I do is if I notice any increase in any one of my setups that isn't fully automated, then I'll go ahead and just slowly do consistent water change over a few day time frame. And really, it just comes down to your gut. Go with your gut. If you start second guessing yourself and you're like, okay, this is probably too much, your gut's probably telling you it's too much. So maybe do a 5 or 10%, wait 24 hours, 18 hours, then do another 5%, if that makes sense. Because I think doing one extreme over the next is really going to send your fish into a state of shock. If they're already in that state, it's just, I try to look at things oftentimes as like a human component. I guess just because I deal a lot with disability and illness myself, maybe it's just easier for me to identify from like that state of mind. And I really just try to apply that to my fish. And for me, it has worked. But
well,
yeah,
Jeremy, I need to interrupt you just for a moment. Someone has alerted us to one of your parrotfish on the filter behind you. So if you need to mute your camera in order to take care of your fish.
On the filter? No, that's yeah, no fish. The parrotfish are right here in the front. I think what they're referring to is the my pot scrubber in the back. That's for my overflow, so nothing gets stuck in it.
All right, Cichlid 5, everything's okay. He's posted 3 or 4 times. Check that parrotfish.
Oh no, those parrotfish are, that guy's pushing about 10 inches right there, so that guy wouldn't get stuck.
Okay.
these are big boys. So yeah, no, I appreciate them alerting me though. But yeah, I do got to fix that. That's just a pot scrubber that I use.
It just happens to be the same color as your parrotfish.
Yeah.
We do have Chaz in the house. He has joined.
I've seen that. How you doing, buddy? Nice seeing you again.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions about the dirted tank? I saw Priscilla said that she loved her dirty tank until it cracked on her the other day. So she lost that beautiful tank in the middle of her moving around and changing things around in her house. And I didn't hear the story as to what happened to the fish. Hopefully she got the fish out.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I was going to agree with you about as far as the dirted tank, you can make them pretty, but most of them are not going to be, as you said, show tanks.
Yeah.
Because you want that algae to grow. You want that mulm to show, to thicken up on the substrate that helps feed the roots of the plants. And when I first started keeping fish as a child, I was 12 years old. An elderly lady gave me guppies that were caught out of the fresh streams that come in from the salt water.
Mm-hmm.
And she had 2 and 3 gallon glass bowls, literally, all over her countertops, full of guppies and guppy grass. And so when she set me up, I don't remember how many she gave me, but she set me up with 2 2-gallon bowls with guppies and grass in it. And I don't know how long I kept them like that. That's no heater. That's no filtration and no air stones. It was just changing the water every once in a while. Usually when it smelled bad, that's when we did water changes. But that was back in the 70s. There wasn't any guidelines and rules. And, there's so many activists today that was, oh my God, that was the horrible way to set things up. But in nature, a lot of times the surface of the water is what is changing, and what is underneath is not changing very much at all.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at a stream, the upper levels of the water is flowing, not the whole creek, or you wouldn't have any substrate. You wouldn't have anything in the bottom. Now we have gully washers that call storms that causes that natural environment to get all muddy. I have a creek right here in my yard that runs down 2 sides of my property. And when it storms, that becomes so muddy. And my heart goes out to the livestock that's in that creek, because I know there's turtles in there and different kinds of fish and catfish and crayfish, and all of them gets washed out of their natural habitat, and they get thrown down the creek somewhere. And so I get new fish come in all the time. I get some minnows that actually get the size of the palm of my hand, and then after a storm, they're all gone.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah. Chaz says, does denser dirt, which sinks, make better substrate for plants than those floating dirt, which settles after a few hours?
I can't speak on behalf of that personally.
Well, I do know I heard Joel talking about using clay in his soil, in his dirted tanks. And to me, it can become too compact and doesn't allow the substrate to breathe. Like you set up the gravel, the dirt, and the gravel, which was a natural filtration.
Sure.
Yeah. Someone says they love water sprite plant. I see a lot of websites. The water sprite is out of stock right now.
Yeah, I used to have quite a bit of it. It's a pretty prolific, easy one to grow because I'll float most of my plants, which is kind of a topic in and of itself. But the reason I float a lot of my plants, whether if they're whatever variation of plants they are, is really acting as a natural spawning mop. But yeah, again, I do a lot of things. That's why I always predate myself, probably like a 1993 guy. Because as you were talking about, I mean, people who have pretty much made the hobby what it is today, it's not their first rodeo. So I think oftentimes individuals are trying to rewrite the book on something that's already been done. I've seen some pretty phenomenal fish rooms that people don't even run lights on their tanks. I mean, you're talking like 300 tanks, and every one of them has some just really rare and hard to come by species of fish. And they're all about just basic. I mean, just do your routine water changes. Less is best, and I 100% agree. I think oftentimes when we overthink it is when you start getting yourself into trouble. I think when you do one extreme over the next, and like with a dirted tank, I mean, you have to realize obviously comes down to experience, and I think that just comes to life in general. Is you're not going to nail it on the head the first time. So that's what's so fun about this hobby, and with other hobbies is you have time to learn and just enjoy it. You know, don't be hard on yourself if you're trying to breed something or if you're doing a dirted tank and it doesn't turn out to be a complete success the first time. You know, you have other options to go back and redo it. Just take your time with it and do what makes you happy is the first thing, because I think that's $1 million question oftentimes, and I'm sure you've had that asked probably several times now, especially doing social media. What should I put in this tank? It's such a subjective topic. I mean, nobody knows. It really comes down to what you enjoy.
When someone asks me that question, it makes me think about the counseling that I do. Well, should I marry this person or should I not? I can't answer that question.
There's days where I don't miss doing the counseling, I got to tell you.
Bob answered Chaz's question. He said that the denser soil makes it harder for the roots of the plants to actually get their nourishment. So, so we agree with that. I was going to say, I didn't do a video, and I probably should have done a video when you talked about no lights on the tanks. This office here has lights on every tank, but they're not on timers. So when I went on vacation, I just opened up my curtain I have one window here, and I did my water changes before I went on vacation, and I fed them the morning that I left on vacation, but I left the window open so that they could have the natural light cycle. So they knew when to rest and they knew when to wake. And so my fish fasted for a week.
Sure.
And I lost no fish.
Yeah, it really comes down again to consistency. As I hear sometimes individuals are like, how long should I leave my lights on for? And again, there is some variables there, but you have to realize that they need to go through a photo period. Some species of plants go through a dormant phase where you're actually supposed to pull them out of your aquarium and basically put them into a state of dormancy for, let's say, over the winter, what have you. So I don't know, oftentimes people really do that, but they do go through a time of like a dormant phase. But I don't do a whole lot. I'm getting a little bit back more into aquascaping, but my aquascaping is just letting things, like I said, I don't really care too much what it looks like. I'm more concerned about the benefits of the ecosystem in general. What are the benefits I'm identifying as far as whatever fish I'm breeding? Is it promoting good overall benefits to the productivity of my yield on my fry? So I use a combination of both plants as well as just acrylic spawning mops that I make, and I find that the balance between the two do a phenomenal job, at least for me personally. So I've noticed a big increase when I've been doing that through the years as far as the overall yield on the production of whatever I'm breeding.
A few questions come in here. Priscilla asked, you can just put some, okay, someone asked a question, then Priscilla's answering it about some fluorite in the dirt. When dirting the tank, it gives the same effect as clay balls. That's what Priscilla said. She was answering someone's question. And then I saw Chaz asked another question about do medicinal plant roots benefit fish health? And I need to know what he means by medicinal plants.
I think I'm tracking what he's saying, but I haven't personally, I don't like to give feedback on something I haven't personally tested. That's just kind of my thing. But yeah, that's something I don't know personally. So maybe somebody in chat might know. I mean, we can all do the research, but I think it really comes down to, have you hands-on done it?
Yeah.
That's just kind of my little thing. But be honest with you, through the years in this hobby, I've done little research as far as literature. I just that's just the way I don't know about you, but that's the way I just grew up. I mean, I was always hands-on. I learned by discovery, and I did things through trial and error. You know, my uncle, when I was probably 6, 7 years old, he gave me, I think it was a 29 gallon at the time with some angelfish in it. And I was surprised that I was able to keep the things alive. But back then it was take everything out of the tank, and Mom would make you scrub everything down with soap and water before that. So I learned quite quickly once I got that 29 gallon that at least I learned through that. I was like, why can't we ever keep anything alive? But of course, nobody had a clue because they weren't fish keepers, and I definitely at that age wasn't no fish keeper. So
yeah, you know what Mom said to do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're like, okay, it's that time of the week again. We got to go grab your, whatever it was, 10-gallon tank, bring it over to the counter, dump all the substrate out. It's like, holy cow. So if we could go back and undo one thing, that would probably be the thing. I advise not to do it.
Learning from experience is the best way. It may take us a little bit longer, but we won't do it again. Rob Hicks says he wants to try a dirted pond next summer with valves in it. And I actually found out that valves grow better in the water column than they do buried in the substrate, because you can't bury their the cap of their root system. It's not a rhizome, but you have to keep that above the substrate.
Mm-hmm.
So valves, if you just
I just float mine. I don't know about you, but yeah, I just let them float.
Well, Michael at Green Oasis Farm sends them to you with weights on the bottom of the plant.
Already sends them. Gotcha.
Yeah, and they're just weighted. And I did put mine in the substrate just to that weight.
Mm-hmm.
And they've grown a foot already floating across the top of my
nice
5-gallon. They're beautiful.
Sure.
So Rob, you can experiment with that, but just don't bury those valves too deep in the substrate. And let's see, talking about duckweed. Duckweed is, do you find, Jeremy, that you said you float your plants?
Yeah.
I find that floating plants actually absorbs the nitrates a lot quicker than those that are planted in the substrate in the water column.
I think that really has to do with how intense your lighting is. Because my lighting that I use, I'm old school. I've done the LED thing. I'm not a fan of it. I have I have $400 worth of that came with these kits that you see behind me, and they're actually sitting up in my storage area right now that I don't even use. But they're the T5 high output lights that you would think that can just. I just didn't enjoy it. I didn't find, each one of those is like 110 watts a piece. So from an energy consumption point of view, I mean, it's very expensive to run, let alone it just wasn't giving me the results that I need. So I get from Menards just these compact fluorescent lights. They're 6,500 Kelvin. They have a really nice white spectrum, which I like really, really well. And in conjunction with Easy Green, which is safe on everything in my fish room, from inverts, shrimp, snails, scaleless fish, scale fish, you name it. I've had absolutely no issues. So just dosing once a week is recommended in conjunction with that lighting. And I keep the lighting on some of my tanks like 1.5 feet, 2 feet above, and they still have excellent growth.
Better
Obviously,
illumination that way too.
What was that?
You have better illumination there above the tank too.
Yes, like Dwayne Kitchell's wife, of course, talked a lot about. She's very versed when it comes to lighting and so forth, and that was one of the issues. Is, are you noticing some? And I don't want to take away from, of course, that topic there, but you can really. I do agree with the standpoint that certain lightings can cause some issues in your fish from a negative standpoint. But a lot of it really has to do with if I keep them covered, don't I keep them covered, especially if I'm using glass or acrylic as far as top, because of course some of that deflection is going to deplete some of the illumination. Mm-hmm. So kind of when I explain, because I wasn't noticing any adverse effects or longevity wise with any of my fish, because this is what I've been doing for a lot of years now, and it's worked for me. Because I'm not really looking for like substantial growth where I'm like just hammering out, these plants. I just want things just kind of naturally and organically just kind of grow as they will, without rushing it. And with those two combinations, I mean, I can run entire larger fish room literally off from a 13-watt bulb. It's going to cost me to run, 30 tanks in a sense is what it would cost me to run. Even some of the LED lighting, the wattage can really be quite high. And I value every single penny I can get as far as return, because this hobby, of course, is as expensive as it is.
Well, I have the first experience with the LED lights with the kits that I bought on my 20 gallons. But I told everybody Tuesday night that when I use my plastic Walmart tubs for my fry grow out, I just use desk lamps with a 45-watt bulb in it. And I get good algae on the sides of the tank because I leave my lights on 12 and 14 hours for guppy fry, because of the spines can get really crooked if they don't get proper lighting. And I had the healthiest guppies in that 3-gallon tub with a light bulb, 45-watt lamp burning 10 and 12 hours a day. Mm-hmm. And most of my other lighting, I'm blessed because my son-in-law gave me all of his equipment, lights, pumps, filters. All of my stuff is 15, 20 years old, but they run and they do the job.
Yep.
And I have a 20 or 30-gallon sump here behind me that I haven't hooked up yet, but I'm going to get, research and clean it out and hook it up one day. Short and Anxious asks, what kind of mosses are the best for beginners? And is guppy grass a good starter plant? In my opinion, moss is Java moss, and guppy grass can be sensitive, so you want an established tank or it's going to melt back. And I actually got a piece of guppy grass 1 inch long that came in on some hornswort one time, and now it outgrows all of my hornswort.
Mm-hmm. So Wassertang is another good one. It's going to tend to grow a little bit slower, but that's a really nice one too. But especially for shrimp, if you're worried about sometimes issues, because if they burrow themselves, even with fry, they can literally get stuck sometimes if you're not kind of going through and at least taking the moss out from time to time. I find it's a good thing to do, especially with like Java moss, is to take it out, because it can get really snarly, like a rat's nest in your hair. If you're not going to comb your hair, daily or whatever and keep up with it. And if you have long hair, you can imagine it's going to kind of get into like a rat's nest. So I try to just, every once in a while, if I see this getting really too compacted, I'll be careful. I mean, with a shrimp tank, of course, you got to be careful because you don't want to obviously harm any one of your fry. But maybe in a non-shrimp tank or something, just kind of keep an eye on it. That's another tip there and recommendation I would have is even if you don't want to take it out, just carefully either use some tongs or something, just kind of pull it apart carefully. And then you'll also see a little extra growth, I find, by doing that. And then I've I've grown my own moss balls before. I mean, they tend to take forever, of course, to do. Just your basic Marimo moss balls. I'll just cut them. You can cut them apart, and you can use like yarn, as long as it's, you know, safe, and like an acrylic yarn, something like that, and basically just kind of wring it out and then roll into a ball, and you can just kind of carefully tie a knot using like yarn, and then just throw it in your tank and just keep an eye on it. Eventually, over time, it'll start to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
I like things like that, Jeremy. I actually made a spawning mop out of a fish bobbin the other day, but I covered my bobbin with yarn like you guys do. River Life is in the house. He's one of my new subscribers. Very interesting to hear information from the experience of fish keepers versus well-meaning fish store employees. So I guess he's listening to Kayla.
Yeah, and speaking of, that's a great thing to bring up. I mean, don't get too upset. You know, it can be a little annoying, but that's where we all need to humble ourselves. If you go into a local fish store and they're asking and questioning, they're only doing their job. So I find oftentimes where you can see people get a little belligerent or get a little too high and mighty is where they might want to check themselves and just relax, you know. Doesn't matter how long you've been doing it. That's what they're trained to do. A lot of these are college students, probably actually, a lot of them are probably going through like marine biology or maybe veterinary school or something like that. And that's what they're trained to do, is to ensure that people are doing their due diligence and they understand, you know, how to effectively set up, you know, a tank.
In my area, I have not had the problems that I've heard other people say, that they wouldn't sell you a fish because you told them what you had at the house, etc.
Sure.
But I go in there and I just tell them what I'm looking for, and if I have a question, most of the time they'll just tell me, oh yeah, you can put this together, you can put that together, and I know you can. But I just smile and I say, okay, when I need your help, I'll let you know when I'm ready to net something out of the tank. And but some people say that they can't even walk out the store with the fish. Sometimes too much information can hurt you.
I always tease that when we distribute fish, I go through a full background check, and not that I literally do that, but it's just kind of an inside joke. But yeah, I mean, I think oftentimes too, it really comes down to, because we have some phenomenal local fish stores that have been around for quite some time now, and to kind of engage, especially some of these high school and college students, is just engage in a conversation with them. I mean, have some open dialogue and just kind of develop a rapport. I mean, most of the LFSs I've been dealing with for so many years now. Before we started the website and so forth, I mean, that's predominantly where I used to deal, was local. And then I also did like Aquabid and eBay. So, I mean, I've already been selling or trading things in for many years. So, I mean, most of them are already going to know, unless it's somebody new. But like you said, just kind of open up, ask them what their thoughts are. Now, if I go over in the saltwater department, I mean, we have a nano saltwater tank. It's just not my interest. But, you know, I don't want them to ever get the impression as if I don't want to have, you know, open conversation, because I think really it gives them that sense of empowerment to feel as if they're doing their job. So oftentimes if I see that it's slow or something like that, I'll just simply ask them what their thoughts are, whether if I know or not, especially over in the saltwater department. I'll be like, okay, what do you recommend here? What do you have new? You know, just kind of open it up, and then I think they kind of get a whole different impression of you. And that's just kind of my thoughts on it.
Yep. Show yourself friendly, you'll have friends.
That's right.
DPK says a good way to get valves growing quick is play sand, because it helps them give runners quickly in a tank by themselves. And he's tried it once.
Good point.
Yeah, the play sand gives a loose enough substrate for them to be able to move through.
Mm-hmm.
Now I know where Chaz was coming from a while ago. If you've been reading any of the chat, they've been.
I haven't. I'm sorry. I'm trying to. Trying to pay attention to the chat, but yeah.
His medicinal plants was what I thought he was talking about. And somebody cracked a joke and said it makes the fish swim funny. So he's talking about the medicinal plants that in some states that it's legal, in some states it's still not legal.
Sure.
So how it works in the tank, I don't know, because I can't grow it and will not grow it.
Yeah, that's kind of another topic, but yeah, I got my thoughts on that whole piece, but I'll keep it to myself here.
Or another show.
Yeah, exactly.
Short Nexus is talking to Chaz about the aloe vera, which is a medicinal plant, is used in a lot of fish care because it does help. And don't quote me, but I can see why it would work. Yeah, I have what is it, stress coat that has aloe vera in it to help with the healing, and it helps with the slime coat on the fish.
Sure.
DBK says, I think you have to boil aloe vera in a sock coffee strainer so you don't get the slimy stuff in the water. KP Aquarium says, short, the existing leaves die off to make way for new growth. Rob Hicks says, I have a moss growing on my driftwood, didn't add it to the tank, and not sure what it is. I'm going to make a video this weekend and see if someone can figure it out for me. And Rob, he's in Canada, so a lot of times it does depend on where you got your driftwood, because a lot of times driftwood can have dried up moss on it that comes alive once it's introduced to the water. That's what I found out harvesting driftwood. Matter of fact, when I walk in my creek, the moss that I have in my tanks are out of my creek, and when I brought them to the house, they were brown. When I added them to the water and nutrients in the water, they greened up. They are the greenest. They're not growing fast, but they are very green, and I've attached them to my challah wood and to my driftwoods. And I have a matter of fact, I have some in some green water that's in a vase in my window. I keep a vase of green water.
Okay.
That I add to my tanks every once in a while when I have fry.
Sure.
River Life says, great approach, Jeremy. Relationship building is always healthy. And I concur. White says, short, as Jeremy mentions, I can't pronounce that word, Sawazertang.
It's just, yeah, it's just kind of, you have some silent letters in there, but yeah, it's just Sawazertang. So if you say it fast, it's not really Sawazertang. It's now I'm consciously thinking about it, but subconsciously it'll just come out natural.
Sawazertang.
Sawazertang.
Sawazertang. Okay.
There you go.
It's a good substitute to moss, I think. So, so he was concurring with you. Turtle Girl's got to go. Is there anything else, Jeremy, you wanted to bring up about the dirty tank? If anyone wants to get started, the cautions, cheap fish, you know, because you may fail the first time.
I would just say take it slow. I mean, do your due diligence. I mean, make sure. I think first and foremost is I don't think it's a process of doing the dirty tank that's the difficult part. It's the vision of creativity 6 months down the road of what this thing's going to look like. So I think just if you truly want to do an all-out aquascape, I would say just take your time and slowly maybe acquire some of those plants over 6 months or a year time frame, and maybe having them in other setups. And then you can kind of visually see the overall growth of what they will look like before you actually start a planted tank. That would be my approach, because I don't think that you want to take all these plants and then just introduce them and then realize 4 months down the road that you can't stand it and now you want to start switching things around. Then I think eventually you're going to start to notice some adverse effects from that. But that's just my approach, is I would say take it slow, get your mind made up first. If you have any second guesses, there's a reason why you're second guessing it. Just go with your gut and And yeah, just set it and forget it is kind of my approach to it. Once you get it set up and established, I wouldn't be messing around with it too much, unless you're doing, of course, some trimming or something like that. But I think that's a little bit different.
Well, in the article that I read earlier by Diana Wasberg, or whatever her name is, I can't even remember her last name. She talked about the importance of watching it daily and every other day, testing the water perimeters to see where your ammonia, nitrate, and nitrites are, nitrites and nitrates are. And, you know, you said as an experienced fish keeper, you understand what you have to do with high ammonia levels, high nitrites, you know, you need to do water change, etc. There are products on the market that you can add, like Prime, to help diminish the ammonia in the aquarium if it should become dangerous for the fish that are in the tank. Otherwise, watching that cycle for at least a couple months while it's getting established. And like you said, do your research and do your research. I'm laughing at Bob Wallstad. Thank you. And do your research. And if you can, even draw out the design of what you want that tank to look like before you start planning things. Because once they get established, those roots, it's really not a good idea to pull those plants up. You're going to, first of all, stir up the tank. Second of all, you're going to damage the plant. And your investment on that plant is going to be wasted. I know we're coming up
like,
on 9
like
o'clock.
Charles pointed out here with the Chaz Fish Channel. I mean, as I was mentioning earlier, we're talking about, I mean, I call them ammonia pockets, but between your anaerobic and aerobic issues, but even more so, that's why to me, probably don't want to even say this because we're ending on that note, because then people are going to be like, well, why don't you want to use, I don't use root tabs. I don't find that they're necessary, and the risk to me doesn't benefit or outweigh the reward potentially. I just don't want to chance it. I've had people send me, and I don't want to respectively. So what I'll do is I'll just usually give them away, because so just kind of as a disclaimer, I won't ever use root tabs just because of that potential issue. But I know people have been using them for 40, 50 plus years, I'm sure, that have absolutely no issues. I just kind of go back to that motto, if it's not broke, why fix it? So I just been kind of doing what I'm doing. Like I said, I just use Easy Green in conjunction with that lighting, and I don't do anything else besides that. I just strictly do top offs in a lot of my tanks, where I'm not doing, I think oftentimes people are doing too many water changes too often, because those nutrients and stuff, of course, you have to find the appropriate balance. My rule of thumb is, if you're really looking at nitrates, especially in a planted tank, I would have between 10 and 15 parts per million up to like 30, 35. I think once you get beyond that, then you might want to, start looking to ensure that you're not providing too much food, as far as the overall waste distribution that might be happening in your tank, or maybe your water changes aren't routine enough. So you might want to, kind of reevaluate that.
If you have enough, I forgot what I was going to say about fish on the bottom that actually turn the substrate with their the way they feed, like cory cats, shrimp. If you have enough bottom dwellers that will help rotate that substrate so that those pockets can be released, and it won't be so dangerous for the fish, because it's done in small amounts, and then the natural cycle of the gas exchange can take place. And of course, the stem plants are absorbing the dangerous gases, and then by the time they get to the surface, whatever surface break up there is given the exchange of the oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, etc., to be able to exchange.
Sure, that's a great point.
I wanted to bring up the fact that there are some the nutrients that's necessary for plants. Oh, I lost it. Oh, the trace elements for fish's health. That's what I wanted to bring up. Of course, for plants, it's going to be chlorine, boron, iron, manganese, nickel, zinc, etc., stuff like that for plants. But for fish, and a lot of this is in their foods that we feed them, and which is protein, amino acids, fatty acids, microminerals, fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K, water-soluble vitamins, and macrominerals. So those things like that, you need to make sure that in your dirted tank, you've got the nutrients that your plants are going to need, and you've got the nutrients that your fish are going to need. Otherwise, everything else is going to take care of itself.
Mm-hmm.
So on that note, we want to thank Jeremy from Sergeant Tank for being with us as our special guest tonight. We want to thank every one of you for joining us in the chat. We hope that you all have subscribed to each other if you haven't already. Don't forget to like this video and share it. And if we did not get to your question, once this video posts, please leave it in the comment, and Jeremy and I will be sure to be able to get back with you. And again, Jeremy, thank you so much. It's been an honor to have you with us, and I look forward to your next video and your next live stream.
You as well. Thank you so much, Susan. You have a wonderful night. Thank you, everybody in chat.
Love y'all. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.